The college acceptance letter in my trembling hands bore the seal of Riverside Community College, a 2-year institution known for accepting anyone with a pulse and a checkbook. Around me, champagne corks popped as my classmates celebrated their admissions to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who had never scored below 98% on any exam was now holding a rejection letter from every decent university in the country. "Clara, aren't you going to open yours?" My stepsister Melody's voice dripped with false concern as she waved her own thick envelope from Stanford. "I'm sure it's wonderful news." I looked at the single thin envelope in my hand, the universal symbol of academic death. 3 months ago, I had been the undisputed queen of academics at Westfield Preparatory. Teachers used my essays as examples. My calculus solutions were posted on the math department's wall of excellence. College recruiters had been calling our house since sophomore year, each promising full scholarships and research opportunities. Then came the SATs. "I got a 1590, Melody announced to the room, her voice carrying just the right amount of humble bragging. "I can hardly believe it myself. I never scored above 1200 on any practice test." The room erupted in congratulations. My mother, Victoria, pulled Melody into a tearful embrace. "My brilliant daughter, I always knew you had it in you." I stared at my own score report, the numbers swimming before my eyes. 890. Not even breaking 4 digits. It was mathematically impossible for someone with my academic record to score so poorly. Yet there it was, printed in official college board font. "Clara scored 890, I heard someone whisper behind me. "Can you believe it? All those years of acting superior, and she can't even crack 1000. The whispers grew louder. I always suspected she was cheating. Her teachers must have been giving her special treatment. What a fraud. But I knew the truth. 3 days before the test, Melody had approached me with tears in her eyes, begging for help with her final practice exam. Like the naive fool I was, I had spent the entire night walking her through every problem type, sharing every test-taking strategy I had developed over years of preparation. I had even given her my lucky pencils, the mechanical ones I used for every important exam. What I hadn't known was that Melody possessed something far more powerful than luck, a supernatural system that allowed her to swap academic achievements with anyone she chose. While I slept peacefully the night before the SAT, confident in my abilities, she had made her exchange. My years of dedication, my natural intelligence, my perfect preparation, all of it became hers with a simple mental command. The morning of the test, I had felt strange, fuzzy, like trying to remember a word that sat just on the tip of my tongue, except the word was everything I had ever learned. Math concepts that had been as natural as breathing suddenly felt foreign. Reading passages that should have been elementary became incomprehensible walls of text. I had stumbled through the exam in a daze, second-guessing answers I would normally have known instantly. When time was called, I sat in my chair feeling hollow, as if someone had scooped out my brain and replaced it with cotton. Now, watching Melody bask in the glow of my stolen success, I felt something dark and cold settle in my chest. She stood surrounded by admirers, playing the role of the underdog who had finally bloomed. Her performance was flawless. The shy smile, the modest deflection of compliments, the "I don't know how I did it" routine that made everyone love her even more. "Clara, honey, what happened?" Victoria finally noticed my silence. Her voice carried disappointment rather than concern. 890 is, well, it's quite a drop from your usual performance. Maybe the pressure got to her, Melody suggested, her tone syrupy with fake sympathy. Poor Clara has been under so much stress, trying to live up to everyone's expectations. Sometimes our minds just break, as if I was some delicate flower that had wilted under pressure, rather than a girl who had been systematically robbed of everything that made her who she was. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone what Melody had done, but who would believe me? A girl claiming her stepsister had stolen her intelligence through supernatural means. I would sound delusional. The rejection letters had started arriving 2 weeks later. Harvard, we regret to inform you. Yale, after careful consideration. Princeton, we appreciate your interest, however. Each one felt like a nail in the coffin of my future. Meanwhile, Melody's acceptance letters poured in like golden rain. Full scholarships, research opportunities, honours programs, everything that should have been mine. Victoria had hung each acceptance letter on the refrigerator like a shrine to her brilliant daughter. I just don't understand how this happened, my physics teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, had said during our last meeting before graduation. Clara, you were solving college-level problems in your sophomore year. You had such potential. Had. Past tense. Everything about my academic life had become past tense overnight. The final blow came during the graduation ceremony. As valedictorian, a title she had earned with my stolen achievements, Melody delivered a speech about perseverance and believing in yourself. She spoke about overcoming obstacles and never giving up on your dreams, her voice ringing with conviction as she stood behind the podium that should have been mine. We all have moments when we doubt ourselves, she said, her eyes finding mine in the audience. When we think we're not smart enough, not good enough. But I'm living proof that with hard work and determination, anyone can achieve their dreams. The audience erupted in applause. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. And I sat in my folding chair, watching my life being lived by someone else. After the ceremony, as families posed for photos and exchanged congratulations, I found myself alone by the refreshment table. The popular kids who used to seek out my help with their homework now avoided me like a contagious disease. Teachers who had once praised my insights now spoke to me in carefully neutral tones, as if I were a wounded animal they didn't want to spook. Enjoying the party? Melody appeared beside me, her valedictorian medal gleaming on her chest. Up close, I could see something different in her eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. My sharpness. Congratulations, I managed to say. You must be very proud. I am, she replied, popping a grape into her mouth. You know, Clara, I never thanked you properly for all your help these past years. All those study sessions, all that tutoring. I couldn't have done this without you. There was something in her tone, a subtle mockery, that made my skin crawl. She knew. Somehow she knew that I knew. It's funny how things work out, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. You spend so many years being the smart one, the perfect one. Everyone always said, be more like Clara, study like Clara, think like Clara. But in the end, I'm the one going to Stanford, and you're the one going to... Where was it again? Riverside Community College. The venom in her voice was carefully hidden beneath layers of sisterly concern, but I caught it. I caught all of it. I hope you'll be happy there, she added, patting my arm with false affection. I'm sure you'll find your place eventually. That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, my acceptance letter to Riverside Community College crumpled on my nightstand. Through the thin walls, I could hear Melody on the phone with friends, making plans for Stanford orientation, discussing dorm assignments and class schedules. Living my life. I thought about the future stretching ahead of me, 2 years at a community college, then maybe a transfer to a state school if I was lucky, a career in something mundane and forgettable, a life of mediocrity, always wondering what might have been if I hadn't been robbed of my one chance at greatness. The rage built slowly, starting as a warm ember in my chest and growing into a consuming fire. Melody had taken everything from me, my intelligence, my achievements, my future. She had stolen my very identity and was wearing it like a costume, basking in praise that rightfully belonged to me. I made a decision that night, lying in my narrow bed with tears of fury running down my cheeks. If I couldn't have justice in this life, perhaps I could find it in the next. The car accident happened 3 weeks later. I was driving to my summer job at a local bookstore, still numb from the shock of how completely my life had changed, when the truck ran the red light. The last thing I saw was Melody's face, twisted with an emotion I couldn't identify, reflected in the storefront window as I flew through the air. The last thing I heard was her voice, barely audible above the sound of screaming metal and shattering glass. "I'm sorry, Clara, but I couldn't let you figure it out." Then everything went black. And then I opened my eyes to my bedroom ceiling, sunlight streaming through my familiar windows, my alarm clock reading 6:30 a.m. on a date that made my heart stop. March 15th, exactly 1 year before the SATs. The day I had first begun seriously preparing for the test that would determine my future. I sat up in bed, my mind reeling. Everything was exactly as it had been. My physics textbook stacked neatly on my desk, my acceptance letters from summer academic programs pinned to my bulletin board, my perfect attendance award from junior year hanging on the wall. But I wasn't the same Clara who had gone to sleep in this bed a year ago. I was the Clara who had lost everything, who had died knowing the truth about what had been stolen from me. I was the Clara who remembered. Downstairs, I could hear Melody making breakfast, humming cheerfully as she prepared for another day of pretending to be the struggling student who needed her brilliant stepsister's help. Another day of positioning herself to steal my achievements. I smiled for the first time in months. Let her hum, let her plan, let her think she understood how this game was played. This time I would be ready for her. This time, when she tried to steal my perfect score, she would find that I'd already erased all the right answers. The breakfast conversation unfolded exactly as I remembered. Melody fidgeted with her phone, building up courage for the request that had sealed my fate in my previous life. Victoria hummed while flipping pancakes, completely oblivious to the supernatural predator living under her own roof. "Clara," Melody began, her voice carefully modulated to sound uncertain and hopeful. "I've been thinking about SAT prep, and honestly, I'm terrified. All these programs cost thousands of dollars, and Mum's already stressed about college expenses." I took a sip of orange juice, letting her words hang in the air. In my first life, I had immediately jumped in to reassure her, eager to play the role of the helpful big sister. This time, I waited. "I was wondering if maybe you could help me study?" she continued, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. "I know you're incredibly busy with your own prep, but you explain things so much better than any tutor could. Please." The performance was flawless. The trembling voice, the downcast eyes, the perfect balance of humility and desperation. Melody had always been gifted at manipulation, even before supernatural forces enhanced her abilities. "Of course," I replied, injecting just the right amount of warmth into my voice. "We're sisters. I'd be happy to help you reach your potential." Relief flooded her features, followed by something darker, a flash of triumph she couldn't quite suppress. She had expected more resistance, had prepared arguments and emotional manipulations. My easy agreement caught her off guard, but she recovered quickly. "Thank you so much, Clara. This means everything to me." As she spoke, I noticed something I had missed before, a faint shimmer in the air around her, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The supernatural system was already there, invisible threads connecting her to something beyond normal reality. I blinked hard, and the shimmer disappeared. After breakfast, I locked myself in my room and pulled out a journal I had never used in my previous timeline. If I was going to change the outcome, I needed to document everything with scientific precision. Every anomaly, every strange occurrence, every moment when Melody's mask slipped. Page 1, March 15th. Melody initiates contact. Supernatural presence confirmed. She has no idea I remember everything. The tutoring sessions began that very afternoon. I watched Melody struggle with problems that should have been elementary for someone planning to absorb a genius-level intellect. She couldn't factor polynomials without extensive help, stumbled over basic grammar rules, and needed 3 explanations to understand a simple physics concept. "I'm so stupid," she moaned after failing to solve a quadratic equation for the 4th time. "How do you make this look so easy?" In my previous life, I had rushed to reassure her, building up her confidence and self-esteem. This time, I simply shrugged. "Some people are naturally gifted at academics. Others have to work harder." The comment stung. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened, the way her pencil gripped became white-knuckled. Good. I wanted her angry, frustrated, desperate. Desperate people made mistakes. "Let me show you my method," I continued, taking her notebook. "The key to solving quadratics is to always complete the square first, then factor." This was completely backwards. Any competent math student knew you should try factoring directly, before resorting to completing the square. But I explained the wrong method with absolute authority, watching Melody write down every incorrect step. "Always complete the square first?" she repeated, nodding earnestly. "That makes so much sense." Over the following days, I fed her a steady diet of mathematical poison. Wrong formulas presented as shortcuts. Backwards processes explained as advanced techniques. False patterns disguised as insider knowledge. March 22nd successfully corrupted her understanding of quadratic equations, logarithmic functions, and trigonometric identities. She's absorbing every lie. The supernatural manifestations grew stronger as the weeks passed. I caught Melody having whispered conversations with empty air, her side of the dialogue growing more excited and confident. Sometimes shadows moved wrong in her presence, bending toward her instead of away from light sources. The temperature in rooms dropped when she was plotting something particularly devious. But the most unsettling change was in Melody herself. Her academic struggles, which had been genuine in my first timeline, began to show signs of assistance. Problems she couldn't solve on Monday suddenly became clear on Tuesday. Concepts that had baffled her for weeks were mysteriously understood overnight. "I think I'm finally getting the hang of calculus," she announced during one of our sessions, solving a derivative problem with suspicious fluency. I watched her work, noting the mechanical precision of her steps, the lack of the small hesitations and double checks that mark genuine understanding. She was being fed information, spoon-fed competence by whatever entity had chosen her as its vessel. "That's wonderful," I replied, then casually added, "Just remember, when you're taking the derivative of a trigonometric function, always apply the product rule first." Another lie. The product rule was only necessary when you actually had 2 functions being multiplied. But Melody nodded eagerly and wrote it down, adding my false instruction to her growing collection of corrupted knowledge. April 1st, supernatural assistance confirmed. Melody's abilities are being artificially enhanced, but she's still recording my false teachings. The corruption is taking hold. By mid-April, I decided to accelerate the timeline. During one of our study sessions, I deliberately made my handwriting shaky while solving a chemistry problem, then stared at my work with confusion. "This doesn't look right," I muttered, erasing and rewriting the same equation 3 times. "Are you okay?" Melody asked, leaning forward with what appeared to be genuine concern. "I don't know. I've been having these strange moments where I can't remember formulas I've known for years. Sometimes I'll be in the middle of a problem and just blank out." This was the seed of doubt I needed to plant. In my previous timeline, my sudden academic collapse had seemed impossible and inexplicable. This time I was creating a narrative that would make sense to everyone watching. "Maybe you're just stressed," Melody suggested, but I caught the gleam of interest in her eyes. "You've been pushing yourself pretty hard." "Maybe," I agreed, then made a show of struggling with a problem I could solve in my sleep. "Could you help me with this one? I can't seem to think straight." The role reversal delighted her. For the first time in her life, Melody was explaining concepts to me, her voice growing more confident with each word. She didn't realize that every technique she demonstrated, every method she proudly shared, was something I had deliberately taught her incorrectly weeks earlier. April 18th. Successfully established narrative of my declining abilities. Melody is gaining confidence in her stolen knowledge. She has no idea she's been learning wrong methods. The supernatural presence grew stronger as we approached the SAT date. I began to sense it even when Melody wasn't around. A cold intelligence that seemed to watch from the shadows, evaluating, planning, waiting. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night feeling observed, but when I turned on the lights, nothing was there except a lingering sense of otherworldly attention. One evening in late April, I decided to test the extent of Melody's supernatural connection. I knocked on her bedroom door, claiming I needed help with a physics problem that was actually quite simple. "Come in," she called, and I found her sitting at her desk with textbooks spread around her, but she wasn't reading. Instead, she was staring at a point in the air about 3 feet in front of her face, nodding occasionally as if listening to something. "Melody?" I said. She startled, her head snapping toward me with an almost guilty expression. "Clara, I didn't hear you come in." "Who were you talking to?" "No one," she replied too quickly. "Just practicing my presentation for English class. You know how I get nervous speaking out loud." The lie came so smoothly that I almost believed her myself. But I had seen her face in that unguarded moment. The expression of someone receiving detailed instructions from an invisible advisor. April 25th. Direct observation of supernatural communication confirmed. Melody. As May arrived, I implemented the final phase of my deception. I began leaving accidentally completed practice tests around my room, tests where I had deliberately chosen wrong answers with the confidence of my original correct knowledge. Each test was a masterpiece of misdirection, wrong in ways that would seem intelligent to someone who didn't know better. Melody found them all, exactly as I knew she would. Her habit of borrowing things from my room made her the perfect target for planted evidence. "Clara," she said one morning, holding one of my deliberately sabotaged tests, "I found this on your desk. Did you realize you missed almost half the questions?" I looked at the paper as if seeing it for the first time, letting confusion and dismay play across my features. "That's impossible. I was so confident when I was answering them." "Maybe you should take a break from studying," she suggested with false concern. "You might be burning out." But I could see the satisfaction in her eyes, the growing certainty that she was finally surpassing her brilliant stepsister. She thought she was witnessing my natural decline, never suspecting that every mistake was carefully calculated. May 5th, final phase of deception complete. Melody believes she has surpassed me academically. She has no idea she's been studying corrupted information for months. The week before the SAT, Melody's confidence reached new heights. She spoke about test-taking strategies with authority, shared study tips with friends, and even offered to help other students with their preparation. Every technique she recommended was something I had deliberately taught her wrong. "I feel really good about this test," she told Victoria over dinner. "Clara's been such a great tutor. I think I finally understand how her mind works." Those words sent a chill down my spine. If the supernatural system required intimate knowledge of my thought processes, then Melody believed she had acquired that knowledge. She thought she understood how Clara's mind worked. She was about to discover just how wrong she could be. The night before the exam, I lay in bed listening to Melody moving around in the next room, her footsteps pacing back and forth as she made her final preparations. Through the thin walls, I could hear her whispering to her invisible advisor, confirming details, receiving last-minute instructions. Let her plan, I thought. Let her prepare. Let her think she knows everything about the brilliant Clara she intends to become. Tomorrow, she would discover that the Clara she had studied so carefully was nothing but an elaborate fiction. And when she tried to steal my intelligence, she would find herself trapped in a labyrinth of false knowledge I had spent months constructing around her. The real Clara was still here, hidden beneath layers of deception, waiting to watch her stepsister destroy herself with my own, carefully poisoned gifts. The morning of the SAT arrived with cruel irony. Victoria prepared breakfast with the same meticulous care she had shown in my previous timeline. Protein-rich eggs, brain-boosting blueberries, encouraging smiles that masked her own anxiety about our futures. Melody sat across from me, her fingers drumming against her coffee mug in a rhythm that betrayed her nerves. But beneath the surface anxiety, I could see something else. Anticipation. She thought today would be her coronation, the moment she finally claimed the intellectual throne she believed she deserved. I feel ready, she announced, cutting into her eggs with precise movements. Everything you taught me is so clear in my mind, Clara. I can practically hear your voice guiding me through each problem type. She would indeed hear my voice today. Every wrong formula, every backwards technique, every poisoned piece of advice I had carefully planted in her consciousness over the past months. My voice would lead her straight into academic destruction. Just trust your instincts, I replied, buttering my toast with steady hands. The methods we practice together will serve you well. The drive to Westfield Preparatory felt like a funeral procession, though only I knew who was being buried today. Victoria chattered nervously from the driver's seat, while Melody stared out the window, with the focused intensity of a soldier preparing for battle. At the school entrance, the supernatural shimmer around Melody had intensified to an almost visible aura. Other students seemed unconsciously to avoid getting too close to her, sensing something otherworldly even if they couldn't name it. The entity was priming itself for the swap, building energy for the grand theft it believed would be effortless. Remember, girls, Victoria said, pulling us both into fierce hugs, this test doesn't define your worth, but I know you'll both make me proud. Melody absorbed the embrace like a benediction, her eyes bright with unshed tears of gratitude. In a few hours, she would discover exactly what kind of pride she had earned. Inside the testing centre, we were assigned different rooms, a precaution that would prove meaningless given Melody's supernatural abilities. As I settled into my designated seat, I caught a glimpse of her through the adjacent doorway. She was arranging her pencils with ritual precision, her face set in an expression of calm determination. The proctor began the familiar recitation of rules and procedures. Around me, other students fidgeted with nervous energy, but I felt perfectly serene. Everything was unfolding according to plan. You may now open your test booklets and begin. The reading comprehension section opened with a passage about scientific ethics, the same dense philosophical text that had challenged me in my previous timeline. But this time, instead of employing the convoluted analysis techniques I had taught Melody, I approached each question with my genuine intellectual abilities. The correct answers came naturally, flowing from a mind that had never actually forgotten how to think. While Melody, one room over, was probably struggling with the backwards reading strategies I had convinced her were advanced techniques, I moved through the section with effortless precision. Mathematics arrived next, and here my trap reached its masterpiece. For months I had drilled Melody on my special methods, always complete the square before attempting to factor, always use the product rule for trigonometric derivatives, always begin polynomial problems with synthetic division. Every technique was not just wrong, but actively counterproductive. They would lead her to waste precious time on unnecessary steps before arriving at incorrect answers with complete confidence. Meanwhile, I solved each problem using the real methods that had made me a mathematical prodigy. Quick factoring shortcuts, elegant algebraic manipulations, intuitive leaps that bypassed the laborious wrong approaches entirely. The same intellectual power that Melody believed she had studied and understood. Question after question fell before my genuine abilities. Quadratic equations resolved with simple factoring. Calculus problems yielded to basic differentiation rules. Geometric proofs unfolded with crystalline logic. All while Melody, in the next room, was undoubtedly applying my corrupted teachings with growing frustration as they led her further and further from correct solutions. During the brief break between sections, I glimpsed her in the hallway. Her earlier confidence had given way to visible stress. Flushed cheeks, slightly wild eyes, the look of someone discovering that their preparation had been inadequate. But she was committed to her path now. The entity wouldn't allow her to abandon the methods she had learned. The writing section provided my most elegant deception. Here, I had spent weeks convincing Melody that sophisticated essays required complex vocabulary over clear communication, that 5-paragraph structure was for amateur writers, that the best introductions always began with rhetorical questions rather than clear thesis statements. All pedagogical poison. The essay I wrote that day was a model of clarity and precision, direct thesis, logical organisation, specific examples that supported rather than obscured my arguments. The same writing style that had earned me A's in every English class I had ever taken. While Melody was probably constructing the kind of overwrought pseudo-intellectual mess I had convinced her was advanced writing, I demonstrated the real intellectual elegance she thought she had absorbed. When the final section ended and we were dismissed, I felt the cold satisfaction of a trap perfectly executed. Every answer I had given was correct, achieved through methods that were the opposite of everything I had taught her. Outside, Victoria waited with barely suppressed maternal anxiety. "How did it go? Tell me everything." Melody's mask of confidence was already beginning to crack. It was challenging, Mum. Some of the problems didn't work out the way I expected, but I used all the techniques Clara taught me. I have to trust that they were right. They were right, in a sense. Right for destroying her score while elevating mine. "And you, Clara?" I arranged my features into an expression of uncertainty and self-doubt. I felt confused for most of it, like my mind was working against me. I'm honestly worried about how I did. This performance was crucial for the narrative I was building. When our scores revealed the impossible reversal, Melody's collapse and my triumph, people would remember this moment. They would remember Clara's confusion and Melody's apparent competence. That night, the supernatural presence in our house reached fever pitch. The temperature dropped, shadows moved independently of their sources, and an otherworldly intelligence pressed against the walls of reality, preparing for its grand theft. At 11:47 p.m, the swap began. I felt the entity scanning my mind, cataloguing what it believed to be my intellectual patterns. But all it found were the corrupted methods and false techniques I had performed for Melody's observation. The backwards processes, the wrong formulas, the inefficient approaches, all of it carefully crafted to appear like genius while actually being academic suicide. The system began its transfer, pulling what it thought was Clara's brilliant mind and preparing to implant it in Melody. But instead of stealing my real intelligence, it was harvesting months of deliberate misinformation. In her room, I could sense Melody receiving her stolen goods. Every wrong technique I had ever demonstrated, every false shortcut I had claimed was advanced strategy, every poisoned piece of advice I had wrapped in the authority of academic success. She was getting exactly what she had studied and coveted. Unfortunately for her, what she had studied was designed to destroy anyone who tried to use it. The transfer completed with a sensation like ice water running through my veins. The supernatural presence withdrew, satisfied that it had successfully executed the swap. The temperature normalized. The shadows returned to their proper positions. And in the next room, I heard Melody's gasp of what she believed was triumph. Then, minutes later, came the sound of papers rustling frantically. Practice problems being attempted and abandoned. Pencils being thrown in frustration. The growing realization that something was catastrophically wrong. The intelligence she had stolen was leading her to failure after failure. Every method felt wrong. Every approach led to incorrect answers. Every technique I had taught her was actively sabotaging her ability to think clearly. She had successfully acquired Clara's mind. The problem was that the Clara she had studied was a carefully constructed illusion designed to destroy anyone who tried to think like her. By morning, I could hear her crying through the walls, soft, desperate sobs of someone who had traded away her natural abilities for something that actively worked against her. The real Clara remained untouched, hidden beneath months of performance and deception. My genuine intelligence was intact, my real methods were still mine, and my perfect SAT score was safely protected behind layers of lies. Melody had gotten exactly what she deserved. The poisoned fruit of her own greed, wrapped in the package she had coveted most. In 5 days, when the scores were released, the world would see the results of her perfect crime, and I would finally have my revenge. The 5 days between the test and score release stretched like an eternity, each one more delicious than the last. I watched Melody spiral deeper into panic as she attempted practice problem after practice problem, each one confirming that something had gone catastrophically wrong with her stolen abilities. She locked herself in her room for hours, emerging only for meals with red-rimmed eyes and an increasingly gaunt appearance. The supernatural glow that had surrounded her for months was gone, replaced by something darker, the aura of someone trapped in a nightmare of their own making. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Victoria asked during breakfast on the 3rd day, noting Melody's untouched plate and hollow stare. "Just tired," Melody mumbled, pushing scrambled eggs around mechanically. "The test took a lot out of me." If only she knew how much it had really taken. I maintained my own performance throughout those days, the worried student checking college board forums obsessively, expressing anxiety about my confused state during the exam, building the narrative that would make sense of what was coming. On the morning of May 20th, scores were scheduled to be released at noon. Victoria took the day off work, declaring it a family celebration, regardless of the results. She spent the morning baking Melody's favourite chocolate chip cookies, humming as she worked, completely unaware that she was preparing for a funeral rather than a party. At 11:55 a.m, we gathered around the computer in the living room. Victoria stood behind us, her hands resting supportively on our shoulders. Melody's hand shook as she navigated to the college board website, her face pale with barely suppressed terror. "You girls first," Victoria said warmly. "I want to see those beautiful smiles when you see your scores." Melody logged into her account with trembling fingers. The page loaded with agonizing slowness, and then her score appeared in stark black numerals. 720. 720! Victoria shrieked, pulling Melody into a crushing embrace. "Oh my God, honey, that's incredible! That's Ivy League level!" Melody's face showed confusion rather than joy. She stared at the screen as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But I felt like I did terribly. I was so confused during the test. Test anxiety, I suggested helpfully. Sometimes we perform better than we think we did. My turn. I logged into my account with appropriately nervous energy, and there it was, 1580. Nearly perfect, just as it had been in my original timeline when I had earned it honestly. The silence that followed was deafening. "That's impossible," Melody whispered, staring at my score. "You said you were confused. You said you couldn't think straight." I guess I was wrong," I replied, injecting bewilderment into my voice. "Maybe I was more prepared than I realized." Victoria was speechless, her mouth opening and closing, like a fish out of water. Finally, she managed, "Clara, this is one of the highest scores in the state. How did you, after you seemed so uncertain?" "I honestly don't know, Mum. I felt terrible during the test, but somehow the answers just came to me." I turned to Melody with sisterly concern. "Are you okay? You look upset." Melody's face had gone from pale to grey. She was staring at the two scores, her 720 and my 1580, with the expression of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, more to herself than to us. "The methods, everything I learned, it should have worked better than this." 720 is an amazing score, Melody, Victoria said, though her attention was clearly divided between celebrating Melody's success and processing my unexpected triumph. "You should be proud." But Melody wasn't listening. She was remembering every wrong technique I had taught her, every false shortcut, every backwards process that had felt so authoritative when I explained it. She was realizing that she had been systematically deceived for months. "Clara," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "can I talk to you privately?" We went to her bedroom, where the evidence of her recent breakdown was scattered everywhere. Crumpled practice tests, textbooks with pages torn out in frustration, pencils snapped in half and thrown against the walls. "You knew," she said, closing the door behind us. "Somehow you knew what I was planning." I tilted my head with innocent confusion. "I don't know what you mean. Planning what?" "Don't play dumb with me." The facade cracked completely, revealing the desperate fury beneath. "Everything you taught me was wrong. Every method, every technique, every shortcut, all of it was designed to make me fail." "Melody, you're scaring me. I helped you study for months. I gave you all my best strategies." "Your best strategies?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Completing the square before factoring, using the product rule for simple derivatives. Those aren't strategies, they're sabotage." I blinked at her with perfect bewilderment. "Those are the methods that work for me. I'm sorry if they didn't work for you, but everyone learns differently." "You're lying." Her voice was deadly quiet now. "You've been lying this entire time, but how? How did you know?" This was the moment I had been waiting for. I let my mask slip just enough for her to see the cold intelligence beneath, the real Clara she had never actually encountered. "Because I remember dying, Melody. I remember the car accident. I remember your face in the storefront window, and I remember your voice saying you couldn't let me figure it out." She staggered backward as if I had struck her. "That's impossible. You can't remember. The system said..." "The system said what? That consciousness transfer leaves no memories behind? That the person you steal from is just gone?" I stepped closer, and she retreated until her back hit the wall. "Your supernatural helper lied to you, Melody, just like you lied to me." "But the swap worked," she whispered, her eyes wide with growing horror. "I felt it happen. I felt your intelligence flowing into me." "Oh, it worked perfectly. You got exactly what you studied. Every false method I performed for your benefit, Every wrong technique I demonstrated while you thought you were learning my secrets. The entity gave you precisely what it observed. A carefully constructed intellectual trap designed to destroy anyone who tried to use it. The truth hit her like a physical blow. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her face buried in her hands. The real Clara, I continued, savouring every word, was hidden underneath months of performance. The Clara you thought you knew, the one whose methods you memorised and whose thought patterns you absorbed, she never existed. She was a fiction I created specifically for you to steal. But your score, she choked out. 1580. How? Because I never forgot how to think, Melody. While you were busy learning wrong answers, I kept my real abilities hidden. Every lesson I gave you was theatre. Every method I demonstrated was poison wrapped in authority. She looked up at me with eyes full of a pain so profound it was almost beautiful. Why? Why would you do this to me? Because you stole my life once before. Because you murdered me to keep your secret. Because you spent months plotting to rob me of everything that made me who I am. I knelt down to her level, speaking softly. Did you really think there would be no consequences? The bedroom door burst open and Victoria rushed in. Girls, what's wrong? I heard shouting. She found Melody huddled on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, while I knelt beside her with an expression of concerned confusion. I don't know, Mum, I said, injecting just the right note of worried bewilderment into my voice. She started saying strange things about supernatural systems and consciousness transfer. She seems to think I deliberately sabotaged her studying. Victoria's face went pale. Melody, honey, what are you talking about? She... Melody tried to explain. But how could she? How could she describe stealing someone's intelligence through supernatural means without sounding completely delusional? I think she might be having some kind of breakdown, I suggested gently. The stress of the test, the disappointment with her score compared to mine. Maybe we should call Dr. Martinez? No, Melody screamed, scrambling to her feet. I'm not crazy. Clara knows what she did. She trapped me. She fed me wrong information on purpose. Victoria looked between us, her face a portrait of maternal anguish. On one side, her adopted daughter claiming impossible things and accusing her sister of elaborate sabotage. On the other side, her biological daughter, who had just achieved one of the highest SAT scores in the state and was trying to help her clearly disturbed sister. Melody, Victoria said softly, sweetheart, I think you need to rest. This has been very stressful for all of us. You don't believe me, Melody whispered, the last of her fight draining away. Of course you don't believe me. That night, after Victoria had called Dr. Martinez and scheduled an emergency appointment, after Melody had been sedated and put to bed, I sat alone in my room writing in my journal. May 20th, scores released, perfect trap executed. Melody's stolen abilities are useless, built from false knowledge designed to fail. She knows the truth but can't prove it without seeming delusional. Victoria believes she's having a breakdown. Complete victory. But as I closed the journal, I realised this was only the beginning. Melody now knew that I remembered everything, knew that I had orchestrated her downfall with surgical precision. She would try to strike back, would attempt to expose me or find some way to reverse what had happened. Let her try. I had died once and come back stronger. I had spent months building the perfect trap and watching her walk willingly into it. Whatever she planned next, I would be ready. After all, I was no longer the naive girl who had trusted her stepsister's tears and pleas for help. I was something far more dangerous. Clara reborn with the wisdom of death and the patience of the truly betrayed. And I was just getting started.